In this video, you will learn how to use layering on your miniatures. If you didn't learn techniques like wet blending, feathering, or you don't have an airbrush, do not worry, because you can paint everything with layering. To simplify things, there are just two factors when it comes to paint consistency. You either add more paint, or you add more water or any kind of solvent. If you add a lot of water, you get a wash. If you are using a lot of paint and very little amount of water, that's good for dry brushing. However, we will use neither of these, because when you are layering, you are mostly in the middle. When you base coat your miniature, you wanna use a bit thicker layer for better coverage. But of course, you have to spread it so you don't obscure any details. As you progress on your mini, you wanna use more diluted paint for your standard layers. This is because you get smoother transitions and finish. Additionally, if you wanna change anything or fix any mistakes, it's way easier to do this over layers that are not fully opaque. Finally, when you are refining stuff on your mini, you are gonna use glaze consistency. This is useful for those small, final volumetric highlights that should be very transparent. So essentially, you are using more paint and less water early on because you simply need your minis filled with the main color. And as you progress, your layers should be less and less opaque, so you have more control over how much paint you wanna add. Since this approach is so universal, you can apply it to any miniature, and with enough patience, you can paint anything you want. And for example, entirety of this miniature has been painted with layering, so I didn't use any washes, wet blending, or an airbrush. Everything is built up from dark and light layers. To give you an example, I will start base coating this goblin skin tone and armor. As I already mentioned, to base coat your mini, you can simply add a bit of water, but otherwise you can use slightly thicker layer. But you have to spread it. There is an option to use more water and less paint, but this will make your layer less opaque and therefore you lose coverage. That means that you don't risk obscuring any details on your mini, but it takes you longer because you need to apply multiple coats. Either way, once you are done with your main color, you can start refining. Most of the time you will start dark and go lighter and lighter. However, since the skin is already quite light, I will shade it first and then paint lighter layers. Instead of using a wash, you can thin down your paint, wick off excess liquid, which is very important, and apply light glazes to those recesses. Whenever you do shading like this, there is gonna be some spillover, so just go back to your base coat color, thin it down a little bit, and go over those parts that have been stained. If you choose to start really dark, you don't have to shade your mini at all. So to paint reflections on this armor, I will get slightly lighter color, thin it down, and apply it. I have already explained how to find reflections on your minis in my previous videos, but for standard matte materials, you can simply use a zenithal highlight and see which parts will be lighter and which will be darker. To paint non-metallic metal, I like to put my primed mini against the light source and copy the reflections as they are. When I see that I covered all the reflections with my initial layer, there are two things that can be done. Option number one is to get lighter color and apply it inside of your previous layer. Second option is to stick to your current color and do the same. This entirely depends on how opaque is your previous layer and how smooth of a gradient are you aiming for. Imagine it like this. Here is your dark base coat color. In this case, we will build up the reflection towards the middle of this square. The first layer is slightly lighter than the base coat and I am covering most of the space. Every single layer after the base coat is not fully opaque, so you can apply the very same color multiple times, covering less and less to get a gradient. And this is pretty much how layering works. You then take a lighter layer and do the same thing over and over. Cover less and less, and if you use enough layers that are somewhat transparent, you can get quite a nice gradient. In the end, you can use very thin glazes to fix any imperfections that you don't like. On the other hand, you can choose approach where you hard sketch your layers with full opacity and then glaze over the transitions with semi-transparent color. Then you sketch another smaller layer inside with full opacity and glaze over the transitions again, and so on and so forth. And if you are running out of space, you can switch to just glazing. Both of these approaches work just fine. And honestly, I combine them as I need. So if I apply a layer and the opacity is too high, I glaze over the transitions to fix it. If I see that the layer didn't create too rough of a transition, I move on to another or apply it again on smaller space. Whatever you do, keep in mind that you need to have your brush under control. And this is not possible if you don't have a nice tip or there is too much liquid in the bristles. For that reason, always keep a paper towel next to your wet palette so you can wick off this excess liquid. So remember, use thicker and more opaque layers initially, and as you start refining your miniature, use more and more transparent layers for better control. However, there is one exception where you wanna use very dry paint, and that is edge highlighting. This is like a precision dry brush, and the less water you add, the finer edge highlights you get. That's it, subscribe if you haven't already, and see you in the next one. Bye!